The other perspective for me, I call it the leader's hour. One of the challenges to a lot of my clients that I give them is it's not necessarily 60 minutes, but if you really want to be an effective leader, you're leading yourself first. You're taking some time, typically early in the morning, doing some spiritual disciplines, some mental disciplines, maybe some physical disciplines. You're taking time to organize your day and your week. You're thinking about the hard conversations you need to have and the important things rolling up so that when you hit the ground running, you're parallel to and ahead of your people. That would be kind of the working on your business as you work in your business. And that's why I think, to those instant startup millionaires, you and I would say, well, congratulations, unicorn. For most of us, if you want to grow something, there's some 60 and 70 and 80-hour weeks that you're not going to get to celebrate for 3 to 5 years, probably.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Kronos Group podcast. I am your host, Jerry Brazy. Here we go. I got Dr. Andy Neillie today. Let me tell you a little bit about him. He is someone who has built and led in the real world, which is what we're always looking for. He took a business from startup to $5 million in annual sales. Then he decided to sell that one off and focus on what he cared about the most, which is helping other leaders build strong teams. Here's what I like about Andy's approach to leadership is from the outside, in my research, it looks to me like it is grounded. He's not chasing these trends or the fancy buzzwords, at least not that I could see. He thinks that leadership is about humility and resilience and putting people first, especially when times are getting hard. So drawing on all of that experience and research, Andy talks a lot about the power of those small, consistent decisions can make a big difference. They don't make headlines, but they do build the trust and the momentum and long-term success for a team. Outside of business, Andy's active in his church. He prioritizes fitness and someone who finds leadership lessons everywhere from the gym to everyday life, something that anybody listening to this podcast knows all too well about me, and the many dogs him and his family have rescued over the years. Andy, I'm glad to have you here, my friend. How are you?
Oh, good. Jerry, I've been looking forward to our conversation. I feel like I found a soulmate, even the little time that we've been corresponding. I think you and I share a number of things in common. The only thing I would correct in your intro that made me sound a lot better than I am is the best time to sell a business is when you have a motivated buyer that's interested in paying you a fair price. They sought me out a couple of years ago, and the best time to sell a business is when you've got a motivated buyer that will pay you a fair price. I'm sure you can tell stories about that with your background.
100% that. But when they come looking for you, that's what's even better than that is when you get two of them that come looking for you at the same time. Now you really got something.
What do the M&A guys say? One offer is really no offer. You've got to get some type of auction going. Yeah,
that's right. That's the perfect world.
Yeah.
All right, let's before we get into what you're doing now and leadership, and I've got a lot of ideas about that, and I know obviously you do too. Give us the 3 minute. I like to start every podcast. Everybody wants to kind of know where people come from. So before you got to where you are now, let's go back. Where'd you grow up? Where are you from? What part of the world? And kind of give us some of the influences as you grew up that brought you to the point and what we're going to talk about here for the majority of the podcast.
Well, geographically, Midwest guy that moved to Phoenix. My folks moved when I was in high school, met my college sweetheart. We now live in Austin, Texas. Bigger picture wise, you mentioned active at church. I became a follower of Christ early in my life. Don't come from a churched family, but Jesus found me when I was a child. I'm reading about this wonderful servant leader in the Gospels. And then it wasn't even career stuff yet. It was construction work through high school and college. And I had a boss who had an anger management issue, Jerry. And if you're on a job site and he had a power tool in his hand and you were nearby and he lost it, man, you better run for cover. And so I'm reading about what this ideal leader looks like. And then I'm going to work for a boss that had an anger management issue. And I just knew that wasn't right. And that really, in some respects, began to ignite in me this passion that I think you and I share a bit around. Nobody should work for a bad boss. Organizations are there to accomplish the mission of the organization and also invest in their people along the way. And that really has been the leadership development passion I've had for decades at this point.
And what was the business that you started? How'd you get into that, the one that you ultimately sold?
Yeah. Total hand of God, nothing we'd ever be interested in. 30 plus years ago, we had a 2-year-old daughter. My wife found a lifeguard to come and teach swim lessons. We were living in Phoenix at the time. Mr. Ron, the lifeguard, became a dear family friend. I was his kind of business mentor for a while. And if you fast forward 30 2 years later to the mid 2020s, Mr. Ron the lifeguard is today the master franchisor of the largest network of swim schools in the world, Aquatots, and one of my best friends. And Jerry, in 2008, he had turned his brand into a franchise in Phoenix. We had moved to Austin. He asked my wife and me to expand the territory with him and bring it to Texas with no background other than I was a businessman and a high school swimmer. We partnered with Ron to bring Aquatots to Texas. The franchise continued to grow. Today, there's almost 200 units around the world. My wife and I had 5 units here in Central Texas, and we were approached by another franchisee a couple of years ago who wanted to expand into Texas, and so they purchased our 5 units last year. So it's a total hand of God thing, Jerry. If you told me I would be growing a team of 175 people with 10 retail managers over a 16-year period and then selling it for multiple times EBITDA, I would have said, man, I'm not even sure what that means, but let me practice the leadership theory that I am espousing to find out, is this stuff real or not?
Right. Right. I always like to, when we have these conversations, I try to keep in mind that not everyone knows what we're talking about. They're business adjacent. So when you're selling a business, just real quick, EBITDA is earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, all other kinds of things that don't necessarily contribute to what the company that is purchasing you is buying. So you get to strip all of those things out. It gives you a much better number on which that you sell your business. Just so everybody has an idea. It's easy for
basically they took a look at what profitability was I pulling on an annual basis, and how many years of that profitability should they pay me in exchange for taking all future profits from me. So
Yep. Yeah. So in that end, then you were able to do that. That made sense. And it sounds like the timing was really good for you to get started with what you're doing now in the leadership space.
Well, I mean, the interesting thing, Jerry, is I was already speaking, training, and coaching prior to that. I wrote my first book in the early 2000s about the rescued dogs you alluded to and all the leadership lessons they've taught us. You and I both have a little bit of gray hair. We can remember 2008. Jerry, in 2008, I got one phone call and lost $85,000 from one of my technology clients, and those phone calls kept coming. My consulting, coaching, and training business ground to almost a standstill. Coincidentally, hand of God, at the same time, my friend Ron said, hey, would you help me expand the brand of Aquatots? And I knew the business model. I'd been best friends with Ron. And so it was a pivot. And then once the businesses were up and running, I continued to go and do my speaking and my training. I've got 5 million frequent flyer miles from doing this. I managed a team of high-performing retail managers, and I spent 10 to 20 hours a week working with them and 20 to 30 hours a week doing my leadership development for SMBs and trade associations and Fortune 500. So kind of a parallel path. Now I get to do one thing. I'm hoping to do it better than I've done for the last 16 years.
I have often said, when someone asks me the question, I got asked on a podcast yesterday, what is something that the average person on the outside thinks that they know about a business that is not true, and in particular from a perspective of entrepreneurship? My answer was that business is not these television shows that you see where they're building cars or they're building motorcycles and the owner is always screaming and yelling and somebody's throwing a wrench at somebody else and the camera follows them out the door and the door slams. And I said, I got my first job as an 11-year-old. I paid taxes as an 11-year-old working in a restaurant, a local restaurant. I've never not had a job since. I have never worked for somebody like that. I've never seen that. I've had flare-ups and all of those things. But in terms of that caricature, the restaurant manager that we see on television that social media seems to think is the way that you have to be a leader in a business. I said, no, I've never seen that. Nobody would ever work for those people. And if they do, it's short term and it's not going to be very productive. So that's my answer to that question. How would you answer that question?
Well, it's interesting because a couple of your recent podcasts touched on some of the things that I find vital. I think one of the definitions of how do you know if you're being a leader and not just a manager, leaders learn to lead hard conversations. They're the ones that go into a meeting and communicate tough truth in a way that it is accepted. Leaders are good at hard conversations. Managers get the easy ones. Leaders get the hard ones. And so this idea that, man, if I just owned my business, all my troubles would go away. It's just like, no, that's exactly the opposite. You just put yourself at the bottom of the food chain instead of the top of the food chain. And then the other thing is, You've talked recently on some of your podcasts. I mentioned EBITDA a minute ago. We've talked about net profits. This is a language that business owners need to learn because time versus money, you talked about that recently. There is a cost to not having some business savvy when you're trying to grow a business. And so for me, my leadership theory was book learned. And then I started growing a business. And all of a sudden I'm dealing with banks and I'm dealing with landlords and I'm dealing with employees and I'm dealing with all of the stuff, the nitty gritty, that if you don't deal with that, it comes back to bite you.
So from that experience, let me just ask a real simple question here to get this really started. Just consistent. What is one thing, and you've been going at this a long time, you walk into a business, what's the one thing that a common mistake that you're seeing from on the entrepreneur side as the company starts to grow and they're bringing you in to take a look at it, or maybe they're looking at it to figure out what's wrong with it? What's the one thing that you're seeing consistently over time?
I think it's consistent in the businesses that you and I would not be crazy about. And that is, I think management team, owners, leaders who forget that their employees and team members are really their most important customers. I've been coaching a small business owner, a professional services firm, woman-owned business here in Austin recently. Part of her problem is she thought her employees cared for her customers as much as she did. And just recognizing she did not do a great job of casting vision, of holding accountable, of celebrating successes, some of the things that you and I would say, man, that just needs to be part of the job of a leader. She was a bit surprised when they came back and they weren't as enthused about the business as she was. She forgot that her employees were really her number one customer.
Yeah, there's two sides to that coin, which is that the owner that thinks that they're the only ones that can do the job and no one else can because no one cares as much as they do.
Yeah. And the truth of the matter is, at some level, Jerry, I have to communicate with owners and entrepreneurs. That's probably true. Nobody will care as much as you. But if you get 5 people caring 90% as much as you do, all of a sudden you've got 450% of the capacity you would have on your own. Your job is to get them from thinking they have a job to that 90% or to that 95% owner mentality. And that really comes back to, am I going to be a solopreneur, or do I want to build a team that isn't just tied to my name?
Yeah, and I agree with that. The point that I'm making is that they're right in that no one will care about the business as much as you do, because for a myriad of reasons that the employees don't have to deal with. But that should not stop you from letting them do the job you think that they can't do because they don't care as much as you do.
Man, that's a good insight. And the truth of the matter is, your listeners, that sounds like a wonderful Jerry truism. If you're going to do that, listener, you're going to lose money. You're going to be disappointed. Things are going to be stalled. Bad things are going to happen. And that's part of the cost of letting them try things they don't know how to do. And it also creates tremendous trust and loyalty, and they'll end up surprising you with what they can accomplish longer term. So it's a hard job to let go. But if you really want to scale a business, you have to.
To that end, this is a question I talk to everybody that is that I ask everybody in your space. And that is that, number one, I think 85% of everything that I see on the internet related to business is either wrong or misguided, that I can only assume that it is being pitched and videoed by people who read a book.
Yeah.
Or a magazine, or listened to a YouTube video and then saw a Lamborghini on the side of the road and stopped to take a picture of them in front of it, and then started to critique everyone that if you're doing more than 4 hours a week and not driving a Lamborghini, you're doing something wrong. That seems to be a common refrain on the internet. Your answer to that question, or to that statement?
Well, for better or for worse, God shut me up 16 years ago, because I went from being one of those theorists who had a book, a dissertation study, a doctorate, into somebody that was leading a team. And I will tell you, 16 years later, having exited that business, Jerry, I'm a little hesitant to call myself a high achieving leader. I'm a student of leadership, but I'm not sure I ever got it right, because it is so hard. And in some respects, I echo what you said. If you and I could take 80% of what we see on LinkedIn and do exactly the opposite, we might be more successful in our leadership. And really, I call it the era of celebrity influencers. Just
Yeah.
because you got 10,000 followers doesn't mean you have a thing to say.
Yeah, there's a flip side to it, I think, that I'll get your reaction to also, is that it seems to me that the bigger some of these influencers that own legitimate businesses get, let's say people that started a business from scratch and now they're doing hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe billions of dollars. I've known, again, I've bought and sold a dozen businesses, done almost $500 million in revenue myself. I have been around millionaires and people who started their companies from scratch for 25, 30 years now. These billionaires that make it and these 100 millionaires that make it, that then they do videos talking about, if you're not delegating everything and living in the south of France while passive income is being earned, you're a fool. And I go, no, I know that's not how you started your business, because I've never met somebody who's ever started a business, particularly in the early days like that didn't work sun up to sundown and made sure that they were getting it done correctly. So there seems to be a disconnect almost from those people. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, and I think part of the problem with that, maybe it's not a problem, it's just a reality of living in the 2020s. There are some people who, you and I would say every overnight success is 10 years in the making. For me, it was 16 years in the making. So I'm just a little bit slower than most. I know there are some people out there who 6 months in, they flipped a business for 7 figures. But they're the unicorn, right? It's what's that quote Dave Ramsey said? I never seek advice from a rich young person because they're not stupid yet. I want to get advice from a rich old person because they learned what they needed to learn. I'm not sure that's his exact quote, but that's kind of what you and I are talking about.
Yeah.
Anybody that's, probably, I don't know, under 28 and is a multimillionaire, they haven't lived through 2008. They didn't live through the financial crisis in 2000s. They don't know what the real estate market is really like long term. So you just have to be careful. But I also have to admit there are some folks that are half my age that are way richer than I am because they were at the right place at the right time. That's not a proverbial wisdom approach to life that I think you and I would echo.
Right. I agree with that. Along those same lines, one of the other misnomers, and I think it's more in how it is characterized than what it is in reality, is that people are fools if you are working in your business rather than on your business. So there is all kinds of celebrities out there talking, business celebrities talking about how you should only be working on your business and you're a fool for working in your business. I think, having had so many of these conversations with other business owners and people just like yourself, that we all agree with that. But the principle that they use when they're describing it to entrepreneurs or people looking at the business world from the outside makes it sound like there's supposed to be a clean disconnect. What's your approach and how you define that statement?
I think you hit the lever point right there. Let's go back 16 years ago when Mr. Ron the lifeguard asked me to launch his swim school franchise in Texas. I went and got recertified as a lifeguard. I learned the curriculum. I'm far too old and mature and business savvy to be in the swimming pool with a 2.5-year-old singing songs and blowing bubbles. But that's what I did because that's what it took to get it started. Now, the lever became at some point, Jerry, I needed to hire people to do that so I could do the bigger picture stuff. It wasn't that I didn't need to do that anymore. I just needed to find new leases and I needed to find new partners and I needed to expand the brand across Central Texas. But that doesn't mean that I didn't at one point jump into the pool and take care of swim lessons. So I do think that you need to work on as well as in. I guess the other perspective for me, I call it the leader's hour. One of the challenges to a lot of my clients that I give them is it's not necessarily 60 minutes, but if you really want to be an effective leader, you're leading yourself first. You're taking some time, typically early in the morning, doing some spiritual disciplines, some mental disciplines, maybe some physical disciplines. You're taking time to organize your day and your week. You're thinking about the hard conversations you need to have and the important things rolling up so that when you hit the ground running, you're parallel to and ahead of your people. That would be kind of the working on your business as you work in your business. And that's why I think, to those instant startup millionaires, you and I would say, well, congratulations, unicorn. For most of us, if you want to grow something, there's some 60 and 70 and 80-hour weeks that you're not going to get to celebrate for 3 to 5 years, probably.
Yeah, particularly in the early days, those startup days, they're just going to require all of your attention and then some, doing the actual jobs, to your point, in the pool, helping babies blow bubbles.
Yeah.
Ultimately, you teach somebody to let the babies blow the bubbles, but you still know how to do it, and you're still interacting with them and making sure that it's being done in the most efficient way possible. And then once they start to really be able to do that well, you start talking to them about, is there a better way to do it? Have they learned something over time? You're not in the pool doing it, but you're still involved in the business. And
exactly right.
In particular, in that little, what might not seem too important, you got to make sure you keep your thumb on it. You're not doing it. I always said, in all of my businesses, from the first one I started up, I hate cleaning bathrooms. So I wouldn't ask anybody to clean a bathroom for me because I hate doing it. So we brought somebody in from the outside. Always. Even when I couldn't afford it, I brought somebody in from the outside because I hate cleaning the bathrooms. But I know how to do every single job in the company. Therefore, when the guys who can do it better than I can talk to me about it, then I can have a conversation with them and understand what it is that we're talking about and try to improve it.
You're right. And I do think that changes over time, right? I'm in Austin, Texas, tons of high-tech stuff going on here. I was with the business leader this morning, and I was just getting a sense of his role. He's trained. He's got an electrical engineering degree, trained in software coding. But what he does today is primarily managing his team and setting agile goals for them, 3 weeks, 3 months, 3 quarters out. That's the step that he's had to take back, where he still has those skills, although probably his software skills are 3 or 4 years old and there's been so much change. But now his skills have more to do with leadership skills rather than coding skills, because that's what his company needed for him to scale.
Yeah, and I think to take that to the next point is that, I don't know, I've managed IT guys now for 25, 30 years in my businesses. I don't know how to write code, but I understand what can be written with code. I understand what code can do for me in my businesses. I understand computers and networks and setups. Can I do them? No, not on your life. I could pull a wire, I suppose, but that'd be about the extent of it. But I understand what can be done, and then I leave it to the professionals to go do what it is that I need done or what I need to get out of it.
Yeah. The only thing that I would add to that, because I find myself a lot of times leading things that I don't fully understand. I need to have some type of audit system in check when I'm giving people responsibility that I don't fully understand. So I've got to have, an outside contract bookkeeper, or I've got to have a team from the home office that will come in and audit the most recent swim school or swim lesson curriculum, because I've lost that critical eye, or I never had it. So I've got to make sure somebody has it. We talk a lot about critical eye without a critical spirit. Part of the job of a leader is to have a critical eye without a critical spirit. And that's where at times, to be real honest, Jerry, I think I have practiced leadership abdication and pretended it was simply leadership delegation. That comes back to bite you in the butt if you're not careful.
Yes, in that statement right there, I'm glad that you said that, because in that statement right there, it could be misconstrued that while you are doing abdication, you could fool yourself into saying, well, I'm doing what I saw on the internet by not in, but on.
Yeah. And you're interviewing somebody right now that knows he's guilty of that at times, because it was the easier thing to do short term. Is all right. She's got hold of that, so I don't have to worry about it. And that, and ultimately, as the business owner, that ended up costing me time, money, disappointment, lower customer service scores, et cetera, because I pretended abdicating was delegating when I needed to have somebody have a critical eye on what was happening. Not a critical spirit, but a critical eye.
This is the important part about business and success that I want people to hear, is the conversation we're having right now. So much of it, in order to get clicks and likes, it needs to be, I made $5 million in 20 minutes and this is how I did it. And then people follow them. What they don't hear, you're giving your advice based on your experience and what you think works. I'm doing the same thing. But inherent is that I have a car collection. And at one point I had a huge car collection. And so I'm big into cars, and I would be driving a car that would make me embarrassed, but I love to do it, but I hate talking about it. And some fancy car. And inevitably the kid would ask me in a parking lot, hey, what do you do for a living that you got this car? And I would say, well, I'm going to tell you what I did, which is I was working at McDonald's when I was 16 years old, and I paid attention, and things I learned at McDonald's when I was 16 years old, I put to work in my businesses today. Imagine that they paid me at McDonald's $3 an hour to teach me systems and processes that I could take forward because I paid attention and use in my businesses that have done hundreds of millions of dollars. That's my answer. What I'm saying is that it is all heartache. It is all learning. It is all mistakes. It is all losing. It is all regrowing. It's coming back. It's figuring out what you did wrong. It's self-assessment. The world makes everything look like it's beautiful. And the question is, how do I afford that car? The question is, what did I do so that I was able to afford that car?
And how do I not make that mistake more than once or twice before I start correcting myself?
If I can not do it 3 times is bad. 2 is okay.
Two is all right. Yeah. Well, and here's the thing that encourages me. Many of your listeners are what I would call the 20-something guy that wants to make a mark in the universe kind of person. The fact that they want to listen to this hard message you're communicating gives me hope for our future economy, because while the Instagram people might make a statement that, oh, you know what, I went to Bali and became a digital nomad and I'm living the good life. The people that listen to you, they know I need to grind. I'm just going to grind. If I want to do what I can do, I need to grind. And man, good for them. Good for them.
It's funny that you say Bali. I was invited on a young man's podcast. He's 24 out of London. So I took him up on it. And it turns out that he was in Bali, Indonesia on vacation, and that they ended up staying there for a couple of months. And his buddies in London, they're all graduating from college, and they're thinking about going into finance. And do they go to London or do they go to New York? Right. I mean, these guys are educated. They have backgrounds. And he brought me on his podcast, and I blew him away on the podcast with my approach to life. So much so that at the end, I think it's the 29th of February, we're going to do a simulcast live stream with him and a bunch of his buddies. I've got a group of 20-somethings on this end over here that are going to tune in. And these guys are just going to, hopefully I get 10, 12, 15 of them. And they're just going to pepper me with questions, because my answers to their questions about success and about what they should do are nothing like what they've heard their entire lives. So much so, and they were smart enough to go, I don't know if I believe what Jerry's saying, but I want to hear more of it. I want to know what he's talking about.
Good for them. Good for them. Yeah. Well, and you're not the only voice in the wilderness, right? There's a lot of people that are saying the messages you're getting on Instagram and LinkedIn aren't true, folks. The problem is there's kind of this siren song of, well, but that sure sounds good. I'd love to go to Bali and open my laptop 3 hours a day and then go surfing the rest of the day. And it's like, yeah, there are some people that have done that, undoubtedly, and not very many. And 3 years later, what have they got to show for it? So I think the fact that you've got a bunch of 20-somethings listening to you, again, that's an encouragement to me that the future is in good hands. Probably the other thing we should encourage your listeners is, if you're competing against somebody who wants to open their laptop for 3 hours a day and then go surf, you're going to win.
That's right.
Because you'll get the client call you've been waiting for while they're out waiting for the next wave.
That's again, the parallel here. You make great points, because my businesses are originally built on my largest customer over the last 25 years has spent about $1 million a year with me. That company's been with me now 27 years. They are my customer because on Saturday afternoon, I had just opened my business. She called two other people, 2 other companies, established, built, bigger companies. They were bigger than me at the time, and they didn't answer on a Saturday. She had something personal she wanted, not business, but it was related to the business that she wanted done in transportation. I, of course, answered the phone, which blew her away. I, of course, took care of the problem with her. In fact, I had my dad go take care of the problem for her because he was closest, right? And we took care of it. And that customer has been my friend now for almost 3 decades and has spent about $1 million a year with me. So to your point, I answered the phone because I'm hungry and I got energy and I want to build this thing, and hours and time and minutes don't matter. Inconveniences don't matter. I'm out here to get the job done.
Yeah. Yeah. Good for you.
Yeah.
Good for you. And I think you and I need to balance that. Really what we're talking about is a work harder message, and that's just what it's going to take, is to work harder. And we also need to figure out how to balance that, right? I am turning my computer off at 4:30 this afternoon. It's early in the first quarter of this year. I'm not sure when we're going to get this published, but my grown daughter's Christmas present to me was a night at the movies tonight. And we're going to dinner and going to the movies. And so we work really hard, and then we play hard as well, don't we?
So one of the questions I did have for you in doing my research about you, this seems to be a theme I hear a lot in this space, which is the word burnout. And along the lines of what you're talking about, you could time for your family and make time for you 100%. And then on the backside of that is also this word burnout. So on the first question and what you're talking about, I say to everyone, again, back to the internet. The internet will tell you you can't have both, that you cannot have a home life and you cannot have a business life. I worked 15 to 18 hours a day. My first business did 4 million the first year, 8 million, 12 million, 14 million. The average ticket price was $7. I was working morning, noon, and night, and I wasn't making any money for the first couple of years. I was refereeing basketball games 4 or 5 days a week to pay the actual bills to keep the lights on. But the thing was, I was home 80% of the time when my 3 children were little, to wrestle with them at 8 o'clock at night, to go and do all of those things. And then as I would shut the door to their room, after all of that, I would say to them, what are you going to be when you grow up? They would say, whatever I want. I'd say, how are you going to get there? They would say, I'm going to work hard and be smart, Daddy. If you brought them in here right now, they're all in their mid-20s. 2 of them one is in the military, one's going in, and the other one's here. I've been married for 30 years. They would tell you, I remember that. The quality amount of time that I spent with my kids while I was building my businesses out was significant, but it was pointed. I didn't have quantity. I had quality, and I noticed that the quantity many times meant an hour or two with your kids, and then you plop on the couch and you're watching a football game or television until 11 o'clock at night. So I pushed back on the first question, long-winded, of this idea that you can't have both. You can't have the time with your daughter and turn your laptop on. The trick, particularly in the startup modes, is you got to turn it back on when you're done doing that to make sure the world's still functioning.
Yeah. Well, and then like you mentioned television. The television is rarely ever on in our house. In fact, I'm working from my home office this afternoon. The only usage of the television on the wall behind me in our little den is
to keep you warm.
A fireplace, right? So, the doom scrolling and the, Landman or Stranger Things binge watching, that's the stuff that needs to get put aside for a while if you want to do what you and I are talking about. There are seasons, I think, when the stress is greater than it should be, and there are seasons when the stress lets off, and it's a matter of finding that rhythm. I'm a big CrossFitter, and we have a saying in the CrossFit world, what challenges you changes you. And so I'm heading to the gym, and I've got a really tough workout in front of me, and it will be ugly. It will be ugly 20 minutes into that 24-minute tough workout, and I'll sleep better tonight, and I'll have better cardiovascular capacity tomorrow. What challenges you changes you. It makes you better.
A perfect dovetail. A few years ago, I lost 100 pounds and got my life back. After being in shape most of my life, I got some heart issues and different things, and I fixed it all. And I'm a regular gym goer, and I've never been healthier. I just turned 57 this month, and I've never been healthier literally in my life. So along those lines, I've realized that in my early days, I was healthier. And then in my 40s, my mid to late 40s, it started falling apart. And now I have my life back together. I started at 52. The question is, I had a realization that while you can be unhealthy and while you can have all of these bad habits and still find success, I think that those things are downriver, downstream of health. If you have your health, all of those things that are very difficult to do are easier to do. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. And again, I think you're talking about the long play, short term, having pizza and Dr. Pepper till 2 a.m. to get that proposal done. Not ideal health-wise, but that's what it took to get it done. But but longer term. And so it sounds like you were proactive in your planning. Jerry, I'll tell you what happened to me is COVID hit. And all of a sudden, all my speeches and training flying around the country came to a dead stop. My wife was doing CrossFit at a local gym. They pivoted very quickly to doing CrossFit by Zoom. She made me join her in the yard to do burpees over a picnic bench and find things to pretend they were dumbbells. And because of that, I ended up losing 30 pounds. I put on 20 pounds of muscle. My life really has changed. So like you, I'm healthier now than I've been in probably 30. I just don't think I was as smart as you. I just kind of got pulled into it because I didn't have an excuse not to do it. And today I'm a, 15 workout a week or 15 workout a month guy. And I am bench pressing and deadlifting and back squatting more than I have in decades.
Yeah,
because of that.
I was laying in a hospital bed down 3.5 pints of blood. I have a 40% block in my left ventricle that I was born with. I didn't know about it. It popped up when I was 38 years old, and kind of, over the next decade and a half, it kind of went to hell for me. And so as I was dying in this hospital, have 100 mini heart attacks. I was addicted to opioids. I broke my back when I was 19 years old. And so I was like, at 51 years old, I was like, I'd had enough. And starting on January 1st of 2022, I said, I'm changing it all. And so I'm a 6-day-a-week workout guy. I go into the gym for sauna and walking seven days a week. My food is always super tight. But my quality of my life, my relationships with my family, my emotional state, my physical state, my mental state, I'm so much more stronger. I'm so much more aggressive than I was in my late 40s and early 50s. And then my spiritual state, I'm so much more in tune with everything that's going on around me. As I get older, I realize that there's so much more. I'm going to run out of time trying to learn as many of the things that I want to learn.
Yeah. Well, and so we sold these businesses. My wife and I realized we are now moving into what we're calling our third, where some of the very things you're talking about, we're being more purposeful about it. And yet, I will tell you, I had a keynote speech last week. I was sick as a dog, high stressed, flew into a very cold zip code. I mean, it was just a hard week. And anybody who thinks, gosh, once you make it, there's not stress, you're not going to be out of balance at times. No, it's one of my graduate school professors years ago said, Andy, there's two types of equilibrium. You have a bowl and you have a marble. And if you have the bowl sitting like this and drop the marble in it, it'll roll for a while and then it'll just stop. That's static equilibrium. Doesn't take any work to keep it there. In today's business world, we've turned the bowl upside down. Same bowl, same marble, but you're always having to balance the bowl because the marble, that's dynamic equilibrium and never quite get it right, but you're moving back and forth and in between and to and fro as you seek to find balance between 80-hour weeks that it's going to take to launch this thing for the next 5 years. And I've got a 2 and a 4-year-old at home. I don't want them to forget that I'm their dad. And you're guilty when you're at home about what's not getting done at work, and you're guilty at work about not being with your family. Man, I get that. You're in for the long game. That's the thing to remember is not this week's decision, but this quarter's decision, this year's decision, this phase's decision. That's a long-term play.
And I think that the disciplines that we put together, like what I just explained on the workouts and getting my life back, first it's you're pushing yourself and you're miserable. And then you get a good habit going, maybe in the first couple of months. And then after about 4 or 5 months, I was down 50 pounds. And all of a sudden I had these disciplines. And what I learned is the disciplines that I had learned building businesses and putting things together contributed itself to that point when my health really needed it. I had forgotten that, but I put it back in place. And as you were saying that, it makes me think about, I want to make the point that what you hear on the internet and what people are telling you about, you can't spend 70 hours working on your business because you're going to give up your kids. So you feel guilty about that because you don't get to spend enough time with them. And then on the flip side, when you're with them, you just think about your business. That does not have to be that way. You can build disciplines. You can come up with a habit, and then you can put a discipline in place so that, because I did it on a massive level. I was growing quickly. I had hundreds and hundreds of employees. But when I was home with my kids, it was time with my kids. And then when I was at work, it got all of my time at work. Now that took discipline and time. Something can wait an hour for you to answer the question. And so I want to make that point that yes, it's true what you said, but you can get both sides without the
Yeah.
guilt. It just takes a discipline.
Well, and that, that's this kind of oxymoron of the dynamic equilibrium of you saying 10 minutes ago, I picked up the phone on a weekend and none of my competitors did. And
Mm-hmm.
I've got this client millions of dollars and many years later. And you and I agreeing at times, we just got to turn the phone off. There's not a black and white answer. It's always a tension, but what challenges you changes you.
Yeah.
That's the point of the CrossFit lesson.
Yeah. So let's talk about some leadership lessons. Again, doing my research on you, it looks like there are, you take lessons kind of, let's say from your dogs and the rescue that you do, from your fitness and the things that you're doing there.
Yeah.
Drawing some real world parallels, I suppose, more than
Sure.
theory. Let's talk about what some of those leadership lessons might be that you find in those unexpected places relative to what any of us could see in the normal world.
Yeah.
I think that question makes sense. Kind of the parallels that you found.
Well, and I'll move into my the lessons I've learned from my wife, and I've rescued close to 20 pets at this point in the many years of our marriage. We've got 3 dogs right now. We typically are a 2-dog family, but my wife foster failed, which means we were supposed to have a dog for a couple of weeks, and she fell in love with him, and a year and a half later, he's still here. So one of the hardest rescues we ever rescued was, more than 15 years ago. Redford was a breeding sire at a puppy mill in Arkansas, and the sheriff's department busted this puppy mill for disturbing the peace. More than 60 dogs were distributed all over the U.S. Redford ended up in Houston, the Houston Golden Retriever Rescue Group we were connected with. One thing led to another. We ended up with Redford. And he was not our first rescue, Jerry. He was number 5 or 6, and we were good with dogs and all of that stuff. And Redford would squat and urinate every time I looked at him. And one of the things I realized is I wish I could say I realized it. Other people pointed it out to me. I learned most of my lessons. Those 2 or 3 times that you and I talked about takes me several times. I've got an outside voice, kind of like you. I'm just kind of typically the biggest voice in the room. And I would walk into the room and Redford would take off running. And Jerry, the local dog whisperer that we hired to come over to our backyard and help us figure out how to love Redford, she taught me what a play bow was. You and I have seen play bows. That's when dogs and cats and others, but dogs, they get down and they stretch and they put their paws out front and their tail is up in the air. And it's this, hey, I'm friendly, I'm safe, I want to be a playmate of yours. And she challenged me to start doing the human version of play bows. And, on the one hand, I'm Dr. Andy with all of this. And on the other hand, here's the lesson, Jerry. I needed to meet him where he was at in order for him to start coming toward me. Well, all of a sudden, I just saw your head nod. That's not a dog lesson, is it? That's a leadership lesson.
That's right.
And that and several other lessons that Redford taught me, I started talking about those. That's how the book came about. The Golden Principles was Redford taught me to quit yelling when you walk into the room. And Redford taught me to make a proactive yes instead of a reactive no. And Redford taught me that no matter how trustworthy I am, he needs time in order to trust me. Even though I might be the best dog rescuer in the whole county, he doesn't know that. So those simple lessons, and all of a sudden I realized those aren't like dog rescue lessons. The proactive yes instead of a reactive no, that's good leadership. That's good parenting. That's good team cohesion stuff. And so I think most of what I learned didn't come from my dissertation or the 25,000 pages of research I had to do. I think it came from the dogs that jump up on that daybed behind me at times.
Yeah, as always, I am quick to say now. Again, I have a dog. Pardon the pun in the fight on this one, which is, I didn't, I dropped out of education, as a teenager, and so I have no formal education, but I've always said that I will take street smarts and common sense over education every time, because they will see those lessons like what you're talking about, because that's how you learn them on the streets. And now if you combine that foundation with a good education, you really have something strong.
Yeah. But I will still go back to Chicken Soup for the Soul is just as helpful at times as the latest edition of Harvard Business Review.
100%.
Just because of what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, I agree. One of the things that I have told my managers, again, I've had 10,000 employees over the years. One of the things I've told my managers over the years is, in my estimation, a good manager gets people to do for him what he wants them to do and let him think it's their idea. And
Yeah.
what I mean by that when I say that is I've always been accused of having a big ego. And I say, yes, I do, but I'm humble. And so I do have a big ego, but it comes with a dose of humility because I never forget where I come from. What that allows me to do is to give all of the credit to everyone else. I had the idea. I put it in their head. I directed it. I got them to do the work. They put it all together. We put it out there. Everyone says what a great job they do. And I sit there and clap along, right along with them and say, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
So that's always been one of my approaches to managing, to bring the team together and get everybody working the same way, is to make sure that I'm not the person that's getting all the accolades. I'm not the one that's on top of it. It's a teamwork, but make no mistake, it's being done the way that I want it to be done, or the outcome, I should say, is being done the way that I want it to happen.
You know, it's interesting because while you said you're not the most learned of people, you're street smarts. One of the guys I read prepping for my dissertation, Arnold Glasnow, said, a good leader takes more than their fair share of the blame and shares more than their fair share of the credit. So here's a guy that I'm reading on my dissertation, basically quoting what you just said.
Yeah.
Now the lesson I'm learning from one of our recent rescues, for those of you that are watching this and not just listening to this, on the daybed behind me was a 30% cattle dog, 10% German Shepherd mix, Traveler. And Traveler needs a job. We've mainly rescued golden retrievers and Labradors, and they're just goofy, easy, and you just think you're a great dog master because they just kind of lie around and do what you tell them to do. Traveler needs a job. And part of what I'm learning, Jerry, is for him to do what I want him to do, be obedient, walk on lead, not sniff inappropriate places, be kind to other people and other dogs. Part of it is I need to meet him where he is. And as a herding dog with guarding instincts, I've just learned Traveler likes to have his back to me and be looking out there to what's going on. That's part of his instinct, his nature. And so instead of me trying to correct him face on, I'm learning how to work with him from behind, because he's a sight dog who needs to see out. So that's a new learning for me. It's probably going to lead to some blogs, and maybe the next edition of the book, there'll be another chapter or two. But I'm still in process of learning, how do I get out of him what I want out of him, given that his nature is different than a golden or a lab. And I think that would echo part of what you're saying, where, you know, if I've really trained my team well, they do exactly what I want them to do, and they think it's their idea, and they're right on both counts. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. Conversely, and you hit that in your statement from your dissertation, my mother, again, I have 8 brothers and sisters. I was child number 7. She had 6 kids in the first 6 years, from 17 to 23. She had 6 children. 7 years later, I came along. So she had learned a few lessons. And as I became a teenager and went through all the things that teenagers went through, I remember very clearly she gave me some advice. And she said, you know, the thing about you, Jerry, is that you are the rock that everyone crashes against. And I thought, throughout my life now, I have never forgot that. I have repeated that story 1,000 times if I've done it once, because that's a manager, right? Yeah. That's an owner. That's an entrepreneur. You have to be that rock that everyone crashes against. That means you don't get to commiserate, and you don't get to whine and cry and complain the way that the other ones do. You have to listen. You have to be that rock.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, and that's hard calls, right? I mean, going back almost 40 minutes at this point, we talked about how leaders have the hard conversations. I've had to fire people. And, you know, Jerry, I mean, they immediately accused me, oh, you violated every core value. You're such a leadership guy and you fired me. And it's like, all of this stuff is just bogus and yada, yada, yada. You say you're a man of faith. How could you do this to me? And you just have to realize, I have a stewardship responsibility to what I own or what I've built. I have a bigger mission. And if I abdicate hard conversations, if I abdicate being that rock, none of my employees are going to have a job next year, because we'll be out of business. And so I have to make this hard decision today with this employee. Again, I would say that's part of the picture that gets painted too easily on LinkedIn and on Instagram, that all your employees are going to love you and it's going to be a big, happy family. Business is not family. You put
That's
up
right.
with Uncle Harry, that weird guy that belches at Thanksgiving because he's family. Uncle Harry shouldn't be part of your family long term. I mean,
Yeah,
shouldn't be
that's
part
it.
of your
Yeah,
business long term.
that's
Yeah,
really good. And in there is yet another lesson, because I could hold my hand up easily and say, been in that position
yeah,
100 times. There is probably more times than not that I did not pull a trigger I should have,
yeah.
out of some misguided notion that I could make it work, only to have it come back and beat me up even
I
worse
know.
than had I
I
just made
know.
the firing.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
The last person I dismissed, Jerry, I did not do a good job.
Hmm.
And here I am. I'm supposed to be the leadership guy. I've written books. I got 5 million and I didn't do a good job. But
Hmm.
at the end of the day, I realized part of the reason I didn't do a good job is I probably should have let her go years earlier. And I kept doing what you said. We're going to give her one more chance and I'm going to work on her and coach her and she can scale. And she's got some real strengths here that offset her weaknesses. Part of my mistake was I didn't handle the conversation as well as I could have. But part of it was, Andy, you kind of backed yourself into a corner that you shouldn't have backed yourself into years earlier.
Yeah, right. Put yourself in that spot, 100%.
Yeah.
And that's a good leader. You're self-assessing. You're seeing what you could have done different, and how do you fix it. Let me ask you, in the few minutes we have left, I want to talk about your faith. I like to take a few minutes whenever it presents itself in a podcast to give somebody an opportunity to talk about that and tell us just kind of how it impacts your daily life, and
Yeah.
I guess more specifically how it impacts you in your business.
Yeah. So, follower of Jesus Christ, the greatest leader that ever lived. And, Jerry, you and I have been talking about leadership for 45 minutes now. Once you get past Jesus and Marcus Aurelius, there's really nothing new. We're just all iterating on it, right?
Yeah.
But there's nothing new. Um, my wife and I go to a church that one of the lead statements of this church is imperfect people following a perfect God. And I would say, man, that's it. Even this conversation just has reminded me. I call myself a student of leadership rather than a leader because I realized I'm not very good at some of this stuff. I like it, but I'm just not good at it. And yet God is gracious, right? I didn't purpose to grow a multimillionaire business, but God purposed to do that through me and for me. And I serve a gracious God, but I serve him as somebody that stumbles regularly. I'm short-sighted. I lose my temper. I don't think strategically, and he covers for me a lot of times, I think. And so I think in terms of the business success I've had, you mentioned it earlier, one of the reasons why most of my business comes from repeat and clients who've left one organization and gone to another organization is that I just know I don't have my act together. We're going to figure this out together, right?
Right.
I've done some thinking, I've done some writing, I've talked with a lot of people, I've got some ideas, but Jerry, you and I are both closer to this end than we are to that end. Other people say, man, that was really a wise thing you just said, Jerry. And of course, you're thinking in your brain, yeah, that's because it cost me $15,000. I made the same stupid mistake 3
Right.
times.
Right.
And you and I don't think it's wisdom. We just think, man, I'm embarrassed I did that and I don't ever want to do that again. That's kind of my take on leadership is, Lord, just help me not to mess things up. Now, that sounds kind of self-effacing. I'm confident about a lot of stuff. This idea of the leaders at the bottom rather than the top, and the 4 leadership necessities I talk about, and some best practices for holding hard conversations. There's just some skills and behaviors that leaders need to engage in. But am I open to learning? Man, I hope I am, because there are other smarter people than me out there.
Let's let I like to end it with a speed round here. So I don't want you to put too much thought into these questions. I have 5 real quick ones, just a few words. Tell me the first thing that comes to your mind, and we will let the audience decide whether or not it has any value. The most underrated leadership skill.
The ability to hold up the mirror quickly.
It's good. It's a good answer. One sign a leader is losing their team.
When they can't sleep well at night.
They're thinking about it.
Yeah.
A daily habit that makes leaders better over time.
That leader's hour I talked about, leading yourself first thing in the morning.
Yeah, it's just so good. The fastest way to rebuild trust once it's damaged.
Well, first of all, I got to say it's tough to rebuild it if it's been damaged. Recognize trust deposits by their very nature are small. You don't get to take 3 small steps and fix it. It's going to take longer than that.
It's like losing weight. It's very difficult as opposed to
Yeah.
putting on weight. Or putting on weight's very easy. Taking weight off is very hard.
Yeah.
Last one, where you have, and I think I know the answer because we talked about this earlier, but where you personally learned the most about leadership outside of business.
From the dogs that have populated our lives.
Yeah, perfect.
And those of you that are watching, you see the hunting dog, the guy that needs a job. He just popped up behind me. And Traveler is still teaching me some lessons, even though at this point I'm an old dog.
Right.
Yeah.
I love it. Andy, this has been fantastic. Let me tell everybody how to get a hold of you. It is NeillieLeadership.com. That is Neillie, NeillieLeadership.com. Of course, we will link it in the show notes. Is there any other way you would like folks to reach out to you?
Now, I've got a link on the top of my website. If somebody wants to grab a quick phone call, they can. Oh, the one other thing, Jerry, leadershipmaterials.com. I've got an 8-page ebook on the 3 imperative leadership conversations, how to hold a hard conversation, how to hold a developmental coaching conversation, how to hold a 3-fold affirmation conversation, simply at leadershipmaterials.com. They can download that for free.
There you go, everybody. You can tell my man here knows what he is talking about. And here's the important part. He's got the experience behind it, which, as I always say, that is what you are looking for. Andy, I appreciate you coming on the podcast. Thanks very much.
Jerry, it's been a privilege. Jerry, it's just been a real privilege.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir.